Hello there, weary traveler, and welcome to this cozy corner of history. Before we begin our journey back to the brutal world of Roman gladiators, I wanted to extend a warm greeting to you, dear listener. Whether you're nestled under the covers, ready to drift off to sleep, or simply looking to unwind with some quiet historical storytelling, I'm so glad you've chosen to join me tonight. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. If you enjoy this style of calm, immersive tales from the past, go ahead and click that subscribe button. But for now, let's allow the stresses of the modern world to melt away as we travel back to ancient Rome in the year 73 AD. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty courtyard of the Ludus Gladiatorius as Marcus Aurelius Brutus, a 24-year-old former soldier, felt the iron shackles close around his wrists for the first time. The year was 73 AD, and Emperor Vespasian's Rome was at the height of its power, hungry for blood and spectacle. Marcus had been captured during a failed rebellion in Germania. His fate sealed the moment he raised his sword against Roman authority. The Gladiator School in Capua stood as a monument to human suffering disguised as entertainment. Its high walls, topped with iron spikes, enclosed a world where men were systematically broken down and rebuilt as killing machines. The lanista, a grizzled former gladiator named Gaius Septimus, surveyed the new arrivals with the cold calculation of a livestock trader. His scarred face told the story of countless battles, and his limping gait spoke of wounds that never properly healed. Marcus stood among 30 other condemned men, each representing a different tragedy. There was Thrax, a Thracian warrior of 19 whose entire village had been burned, and Gallus, a Gallic chieftain of 32 who had watched his children sold into slavery. The diversity of their origins mattered little now. They were all property of the Roman state, valued only for their potential to die entertainingly. The initial medical examination was thorough and humiliating. A Greek physician named Hippocrates methodically cataloged each man's physical attributes, noting muscle mass, reflexes, and existing injuries. Marcus's military training earned him a classification as a potential myrmio, a heavily armored gladiator type, favored for its defensive capabilities. The doctor's cold fingers probed old battle scars, determining which men were fit for immediate training and which required conditioning. The sleeping quarters were cramped cells carved from stone, each housing 4 men on straw pallets that reeked of previous occupants. Rats scurried freely through the corridors, and the constant dripping of water from the ceiling created puddles that never dried. Marcus lay on his designated spot, staring at scratches on the wall left by former gladiators. Some were simple tally marks, counting days or fights. Others were names or crude drawings of loved ones they would never see again. The first meal arrived at sunset, a thin gruel made from barley, supplemented with stale bread and occasional scraps of meat that might have come from any animal. The portions were carefully calculated to maintain strength, while preventing the accumulation of excess energy that might fuel escape attempts. As Marcus choked down the tasteless mixture, he wondered how many men before him had eaten from the same wooden bowl, and how many had never lived to finish their rations. That night, as snores and quiet sobs filled the darkness, Marcus heard the distant roar of the crowd from the amphitheater. Tomorrow's games were already beginning, and somewhere in those cheers lay the sound of his own future. The iron chains around his ankles felt heavier with each passing hour. But it was the invisible chains of Roman law that truly bound him. In the morning, his transformation from man to gladiator would begin in earnest, and there would be no turning back from the path that lay ahead. The bronze horn that awakened the gladiators each morning at dawn carried with it the promise of another day closer to death. Marcus had been in the Ludus for 3 weeks now, and his body bore the fresh marks of intensive training. Purple bruises covered his torso from practice sword blows, and his hands had developed thick calluses from gripping wooden weapons for hours on end. The transformation was already beginning, though he fought against it with every fiber of his being. Breakfast was served in the communal hall, a cavernous space where conversations were conducted in hushed tones under the watchful eyes of armed guards. The meal consisted of bread, soaked in wine, hard cheese, and occasionally figs or olives when the lanista felt generous. Marcus had learned to eat quickly. Hesitation often meant hunger, as stronger gladiators would claim extra portions from the weak or slow. Dr. Lucius, the chief trainer, was a mountain of a man whose presence commanded instant silence. His voice carried the authority of someone who had survived over 50 arena battles before a spear thrust to his left leg ended his fighting career. He stood before the assembled gladiators, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, preparing to deliver the daily lesson that would determine who lived and who died in the coming months. Today we discuss the Retiarius, Lucius began, his voice echoing off the stone walls. The net fighter appears weakest among all gladiator types, carrying only a trident, a dagger, and a weighted net. Yet this apparent weakness is precisely what makes him deadly. He relies on speed, cunning, and the ability to entangle his heavily armored opponents before delivering the killing blow. Marcus watched as two experienced gladiators demonstrated the techniques. The retiarius, a lean man named Aquilus, moved with fluid grace around his opponent, a secutor whose heavy helmet and shield made him appear invincible. But within moments, Aquilus had cast his net, trapped the secutor's sword arm, and positioned his trident at the man's throat. The lesson was clear. In the arena, assumptions could be fatal. The morning training focused on footwork and positioning. Marcus partnered with a Nubian named Cush, whose dark skin bore intricate scarification that marked him as a warrior from the Upper Nile. Despite the language barrier, they communicated through the universal vocabulary of combat, learning to read each other's movements and anticipate attacks. Cush had been captured during a Roman expedition into Africa, torn from a life as a tribal hunter to become entertainment for Roman citizens. As the sun climbed higher, the intensity of training increased. Gladiators practiced against wooden posts called palus, striking with wooden swords that were deliberately heavier than real weapons. The extra weight would make actual combat weapons feel light and swift, giving fighters an edge in the arena. Marcus's shoulders burned with exhaustion, but he continued the repetitive strikes, knowing that muscle memory might save his life when conscious thought failed. The midday meal brought a brief respite, but it also brought troubling news. A messenger had arrived from Rome with orders for the next games. The emperor himself would be attending, which meant the spectacles would be particularly elaborate and deadly. 20 gladiators would be needed for the main event, and the Lanista's eyes swept over his charges with renewed calculation. Marcus felt the weight of that gaze and realized his training time might be shorter than anticipated. That afternoon brought weapons practice with real steel. For the first time since his capture, Marcus held a proper gladius. Its familiar weight both comforting and terrifying. The blade was sharp enough to split hairs, and he knew it would soon taste blood. As he practiced the basic cuts and thrusts, he caught sight of his reflection in the polished metal and barely recognized the hardened face staring back at him. 3 months had passed since Marcus first entered the ludus, and autumn had arrived with its promise of cooler weather and increased arena activity. The harvest season always brought wealthy Romans back to the city from their country estates, eager for entertainment after months of rural tedium. This meant more games, more betting, and more opportunities for gladiators to die in spectacular fashion for the amusement of their social betters. The morning brought news that would change everything for Marcus and his fellow trainees. Lanista Gaius had received a commission from a wealthy senator named Lucius Cornelius Sulla to provide gladiators for his son's coming-of-age celebration. It would be Marcus's first taste of the arena, though in a private setting rather than the grand Colosseum. The thought should have terrified him, but months of conditioning had begun to numb his natural fear responses. Preparation for the event required special attention to appearance as well as skill. A team of slaves worked to oil and clean the gladiators' bodies, ensuring their skin would gleam under torchlight and show blood dramatically when cut. Marcus submitted to this grooming with the resigned patience he had learned to cultivate. Resistance was futile and would only result in additional punishment that might weaken him for the coming fight. The selection process for who would fight whom was conducted with the care of a military campaign. Dr. Lucius studied each gladiator's strengths, weaknesses, and fighting style, pairing opponents who would provide the most entertaining contests. Marcus was matched against Varro, a veteran gladiator of 28, who had survived 7 arena battles. The pairing was deliberate. Varro's experience would likely result in Marcus's death, but not before putting on a good show for the senator's guests. Varro himself approached Marcus during the afternoon rest period, his expression unreadable. The veteran gladiator bore scars from neck to ankle, each one telling a story of survival against impossible odds. His left ear was missing entirely, claimed by a lucky swipe from a barbarian's axe 3 years prior. When he spoke, his voice carried the weariness of a man who had killed too many times to remember their faces. "Boy," Varro said quietly, settling beside Marcus in the shade of the training yard wall, "tomorrow you will try to kill me, and I will try to kill you. This is the way of things. But tonight, I will share with you the only wisdom that matters in the arena. Never let them see you afraid. Fear is a luxury gladiators cannot afford, because the crowd can smell it like blood in the water." The evening meal was more elaborate than usual, featuring roasted meat, fresh bread, and wine of decent quality. It was a tradition to feed condemned men well before they fought, partly for practical reasons — a well-fed gladiator fought with more energy — and partly from a twisted sense of mercy. Many gladiators used this final meal to gorge themselves, knowing it might be their last taste of earthly pleasure. Marcus found himself unable to eat much despite the improved fare. His stomach churned with anticipation, and the meat tasted like ash in his mouth. Instead, he focused on the conversations around him, listening to veterans share stories of their arena experiences. Some spoke of the intoxicating rush of combat, others of the strange intimacy that developed between gladiators locked in mortal combat. All agreed that tomorrow would reveal what kind of man Marcus truly was. As night fell and the gladiators were secured in their cells, Marcus lay awake, listening to the sounds of the ludus settling into sleep. Guards made their rounds, their footsteps echoing off stone walls. Somewhere in the distance, a gladiator was weeping quietly, perhaps facing his first fight, or perhaps his last. The iron shackles around Marcus's ankles felt lighter now, as if his body was already beginning to accept its fate. Tomorrow would determine whether he lived to see another sunset, or join the countless nameless gladiators who had died for Roman entertainment. The private villa of Senator Lucius Cornelius Sulla sprawled across 7 acres of manicured gardens and marble terraces overlooking the Bay of Naples on this crisp October morning in 73 AD. Servants scurried about, preparing for the afternoon's entertainment, hanging silk banners and arranging cushioned seating for the senator's distinguished guests. The occasion was his son Gaius's 18th birthday, marking the young man's transition to full Roman citizenship and his eligibility for military service. Marcus and 5 other gladiators had been transported to the villa in a reinforced wagon, their chains removed only after arrival within the estate's high walls. The temporary arena constructed in the senator's courtyard was smaller than what they were accustomed to training in, measuring only 60 feet across with wooden barriers topped by decorative spears. Sand had been spread thick across the fighting surface, and slaves with rakes stood ready to smooth it between contests and absorb the blood that would inevitably be spilled. The economic reality behind gladiatorial games was something most spectators never considered, but it weighed heavily on the fighters themselves. Each gladiator represented a significant investment for their owner, months of food, training, medical care, and equipment. A gladiator's death meant the complete loss of that investment, which explained why matches were often choreographed to wound rather than kill. However, private games like this operated under different rules, where wealthy hosts might demand actual deaths to impress their guests. Senator Sulla himself was a thin man of 52, with calculating gray eyes and the soft hands of someone who had never performed manual labor. His political career had been built on shrewd alliances and careful management of public spectacles. Understanding that Roman citizens could be controlled through bread and circuses, this birthday celebration served multiple purposes, honoring his son, entertaining important allies, and demonstrating his wealth to potential rivals. The guest list read like a directory of Roman power brokers. There was Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Rome, whose fortune had been built on slave trading and property speculation. Beside him sat Pompey Magnus, the celebrated general whose military victories had filled the treasury with tribute from conquered territories. Even Julius Caesar was present, though at 31 he was still considered a rising star, rather than the political titan he would later become. As the gladiators waited in a holding area beneath the temporary stands, Marcus could hear the conversations of their social betters drifting down through gaps in the wooden flooring. The topics ranged from grain prices and tax farming to the latest gossip from the imperial court. These men casually discussed the lives and deaths of thousands while sampling imported delicacies and expensive wines. Their tone no different than if they were debating the merits of different olive oil suppliers. The betting began even before the first contest commenced. Slaves circulated among the guests, collecting wagers on everything from which gladiator would draw first blood to how long each fight would last. The amounts involved were staggering, enough to purchase a modest farm or maintain a family in comfort for several years. For the wealthy Romans, it was merely another form of entertainment, no different from betting on chariot races or dice games. Young Gaius Sulla, the birthday celebrant, showed particular interest in the proceedings. At 18, he possessed the casual cruelty that often marked privileged Roman youth, viewing the gladiators as particularly interesting toys rather than human beings. He questioned his father extensively about the fighters' backgrounds, their training, and their chances of survival. His education had included philosophy and rhetoric, but clearly not empathy for those beneath his social station. Marcus found himself studying the faces of the spectators through a crack in the wall. These were the people for whom he was expected to kill and possibly die. They laughed at jokes, while servants poured wine into golden cups, their greatest concern apparently being whether the afternoon's entertainment would live up to their expectations. The disconnect between their comfort and his mortal peril was so vast as to seem almost surreal. The first contest was announced with a flourish of trumpets, and Marcus knew his turn would come soon. Varro sat beside him, methodically checking his equipment with the calm professionalism of a man who had faced death too many times to be rattled by it. The veteran gladiator's scarred hands moved with practiced efficiency, testing the balance of his sword and ensuring his shield straps were properly tightened. In a few hours, one of them would likely be dead, and the other would return to the ludus to await the next performance. The afternoon sun reached its zenith as the first gladiatorial contest commenced in Senator Sulla's private arena. Marcus watched from the holding area as 2 retiari circled each other on the blood-stained sand, their nets and tridents glinting in the autumn light. The crowd's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. gasps of excitement when one fighter cast his net, cheers when the other narrowly avoided entanglement, and appreciative murmurs when both men demonstrated particular skill or cunning. The economic machinery behind these spectacles was vast and complex. Beyond the obvious costs of purchasing and training gladiators, there were the expenses of transportation, medical care, weapons maintenance, and the elaborate support staff required for each event. A single afternoon's entertainment like this represented an investment equivalent to several years' income for a typical Roman citizen, yet for men like Senator Sulla, it was merely the cost of maintaining social status and political influence. Marcus had learned much about the betting patterns that surrounded gladiatorial combat during his months in the ludus. Experienced gamblers studied gladiators the way farmers studied livestock, noting their physical condition, recent injuries, and psychological state. A gladiator's odds could shift dramatically based on rumors about his health, his relationship with his trainer, or even his behavior during pre-fight preparations. The spectators in Sulla's arena were no different, whispering assessments and adjusting their wagers as they observed each fighter's demeanor. The first contest ended with both gladiators alive but wounded, exactly as the lanista had probably instructed. The crowd applauded politely, satisfied with the entertainment value while recognizing that the real excitement was yet to come. Slaves quickly raked fresh sand over the blood spots and removed the exhausted fighters, maintaining the illusion that gladiatorial combat was clean and noble rather than brutal and desperate. Varro was called for the second contest, paired against a young Gallic warrior whose red hair and pale skin marked him as fresh from the northern territories. Marcus watched his future opponent move with the confident stride of a professional killer, acknowledging the crowd's cheers with a raised sword before taking his position. The Gaul, perhaps 19 years old, showed the nervous energy of someone fighting for the first time, outside the safety of the training yard. The psychological aspect of gladiatorial combat was something civilians rarely understood. Each fighter entered the arena, carrying not just physical weapons, but also the weight of expectations, fears, and desperate hopes. Varro fought with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to disconnect emotion from action, while the young Gaul's movements betrayed his terror despite his efforts to appear brave. The crowd, sensing this dynamic, began shifting their bets toward the experienced veteran. The fight itself was a masterclass in controlled violence. Varro used his superior experience to gradually wear down his opponent, landing small cuts that bled dramatically without causing serious damage. The Gaul fought with desperate courage, managing to score a lucky hit on Varro's sword arm that drew an appreciative roar from the spectators. But experience ultimately triumphed over youth, and the contest ended with the Gaul on his knees, Varro's sword at his throat. The crowd's reaction to the climactic moment revealed much about Roman sensibilities regarding life and death. They cheered not for the killing blow itself, but for the skill and drama that had led to it. When Varro looked to Senator Sulla for the final decision, the senator consulted briefly with his guests before giving the traditional thumbs-up signal for mercy. The young Gaul would live to fight another day, though his wounds would require weeks of healing. As Varro left the arena to polite applause, Marcus felt his stomach tighten with the knowledge that his turn was approaching. The third contest would feature two heavily armored fighters whose slow, methodical combat style would serve as a deliberate contrast to the quick, flowing movements of the retiarii. The crowd settled back with their wine cups, expecting a longer, more grinding battle that would test their patience while building anticipation for the afternoon's final spectacle. Marcus used these remaining minutes to center himself mentally. Employing techniques taught by the doctors for managing fear and maintaining focus, he visualized his upcoming fight step by step, imagining different scenarios and his responses to them. The iron discipline of Roman military training, never fully erased despite months of captivity, began to reassert itself. When his name was finally called, he would enter that arena not as a broken slave, but as a warrior determined to sell his life as dearly as possible. The bronze horn's final blast echoed across Senator Sulla's private arena as Marcus stepped through the wooden gate and onto the sand that would determine his fate. The October afternoon had grown cooler, and thin clouds now filtered the sunlight, casting the circular fighting space in a pale, almost ethereal glow. 60 feet of sand stretched before him, raked smooth and pristine except for the dark stains from previous contests that no amount of cleaning could completely erase. Varro entered from the opposite gate, his scarred body gleaming with oil and his veteran's confidence evident in every stride. The crowd's murmur grew more animated as the two fighters took their positions, sensing that this contest promised to be the afternoon's climactic entertainment. Marcus caught sight of young Gaius Sulla leaning forward in his seat, his 18-year-old face flushed with anticipation at witnessing what might be his first gladiatorial death. The ritual pre-fight ceremony proceeded with formal precision. Both gladiators raised their weapons toward the honored guests and spoke the traditional words, Ave, Senator, morituri te salutant, hail. Senator, those who are about to die salute you. The The phrase had become so routine that its meaning was often lost, but standing there in the arena, Marcus felt the full weight of those ancient words settling over him like a funeral shroud. The betting had reached fever pitch during the preliminary ceremonies. Slaves scurried between the cushioned seats, collecting final wagers and updating the odds based on last-minute observations. Marcus was listed at 3-1 against survival. Respectable odds for a first-time fighter, but still reflecting the reality that Varro's experience gave him a significant advantage. Several wealthy guests had placed substantial sums on various aspects of the contest's outcome. Senator Sulla rose from his throne-like chair and gestured for silence. Citizens and honored guests, he announced in the practiced voice of a career politician, today we celebrate not just my son's coming of age, but the eternal virtues that have made Rome great, courage in the face of adversity, skill in combat, and honor even unto death. Let these brave gladiators demonstrate for us the qualities we prize most highly in our soldiers and citizens alike. The signal to begin combat came with a dropped white cloth that fluttered briefly in the autumn breeze before settling onto the sand. Marcus immediately moved to his right, following the strategy he had rehearsed countless times in training. Circle, probe for weaknesses, conserve energy for the crucial moments that would determine victory or defeat. Varro, as expected, moved with the patient confidence of a predator who knew his prey could not escape indefinitely. The first exchanges were cautious, each fighter testing the other's reflexes and timing. Marcus's gladius met Varro's shield with sharp cracks that echoed off the arena walls, while the veteran's counterattacks whistled past Marcus's head by carefully calculated margins. The crowd appreciated this display of skill, understanding that the preliminary phase was as important as any dramatic climax that might follow. 3 minutes into the contest, Varro landed the first significant blow, a shallow cut across Marcus's ribs that drew a stream of blood and an enthusiastic cheer from the spectators. The wound burned like fire, but wasn't immediately threatening, serving more as a psychological weapon than a physical one. Marcus responded with a vicious overhead strike that Varro barely deflected, the force of the blow numbing the veteran's sword arm and earning grudging respect from the watching crowd. As the fight progressed, Marcus began to understand something that his training had only hinted at. The strange intimacy that developed between gladiators locked in mortal combat. He could read Varro's breathing patterns, anticipate his shifts in balance, even sense his growing fatigue. In return, he knew the veteran was analyzing his own movements with equal precision, looking for the momentary lapse that would create an opening for a killing blow. The afternoon shadows grew longer as the contest entered its second phase, both fighters now bearing multiple wounds, but neither yet decisively damaged. Marcus's youth and strength were beginning to tell against Varro's experience and cunning, but the veteran's superior technique kept him competitive despite his physical disadvantages. The crowd had grown quieter, absorbed in the tactical chess match playing out before them on the blood-stained sand. Then, in the 15th minute of combat, everything changed. Varro attempted a complex combination attack that Marcus had seen him practice in the ludus, but exhaustion made the veteran's execution slightly sloppy. Marcus recognized the opening instantly and lunged forward with everything he had, his gladius finding the gap between Varro's armor plates. The crowd erupted as both men fell to the sand, locked together in an embrace that would determine which of them would see another sunset. The silence that followed Varro's death was profound and unsettling. Marcus knelt in the blood-stained sand, his gladius still buried between his opponent's ribs, feeling the last tremors of life leave the veteran's body. The crowd's initial roar of excitement had faded to an expectant hush as they waited to see how the victor would handle his first kill. Young Gaius Sulla leaned forward in his chair, his eyes bright with fascination at witnessing death delivered so intimately and skillfully. Marcus withdrew his sword slowly, the steel making a wet scraping sound against bone that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Varro's eyes, already filming over with death, stared sightlessly at the October sky. The man who had shared wisdom and battlefield experience just hours before was now nothing more than cooling meat on the arena floor. The transformation from living, breathing human to lifeless corpse happened so quickly that Marcus's mind struggled to process the reality of what he had accomplished. The crowd erupted again as Marcus struggled to his feet, his legs shaking from exhaustion and the aftershock of mortal combat. Blood from multiple wounds painted red streams down his torso, mixing with sweat and sand to create a warrior's war paint that the spectators found deeply satisfying. Senator Sulla nodded approvingly while his guests exchanged knowing looks. The afternoon's entertainment had exceeded expectations, providing both spectacle and genuine drama. The financial implications of Varro's death rippled through the betting pools, like stones dropped in still water. Successful gamblers collected their winnings with satisfied smiles, while those who had wagered on the veteran's experience found themselves poorer but no less entertained. The Lanista Gaius would feel the economic sting most acutely, having lost a valuable asset whose training and experience could never be fully recovered. 7 arena victories meant nothing now that Vero lay motionless in the sand. As slaves moved to remove the body, Marcus caught sight of Vero's face one final time. Even in death, the veteran's scarred features maintained a dignity that spoke to his years of survival against impossible odds. Marcus found himself wondering about the man's life before the arena. Had he been a soldier like himself? Or perhaps a criminal condemned to die for entertainment? The questions would forever remain unanswered, another small tragedy lost in Rome's endless appetite for bloodsport. The victory celebration was brief and businesslike. Marcus raised his sword toward the honored guests and acknowledged their applause with the mechanical responses drilled into every gladiator. Inside, he felt hollow and strangely disconnected from his own body, as if he were watching someone else perform these ritualistic gestures. The crowd's cheers washed over him like distant thunder, meaningful yet somehow unreal after the intense intimacy of mortal combat. Medical attention came quickly in the form of a Greek physician who examined Marcus's wounds with professional efficiency. Most were superficial cuts that would heal cleanly with proper care, though a deep gash on his left shoulder would require stitching and weeks of limited activity. The doctor worked in silence, his experienced hands cleaning and binding wounds, while Marcus stood motionless, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The journey back to the ludus passed in a haze of physical exhaustion and emotional numbness. Marcus sat chained in the transport wagon alongside the other surviving gladiators, listening to their quiet conversations about the afternoon's events. Some offered congratulations on his victory, while others simply nodded in acknowledgement of his passage into their exclusive brotherhood of killers. The landscape of olive groves and vineyards rolled past the wagon's barred windows, beautiful and peaceful in contrast to the violence they had just left behind. Upon returning to the gladiator school, Marcus was immediately separated from his fellow fighters and subjected to a thorough medical examination. The physician's assessment would determine his training schedule and fighting eligibility for the coming weeks. Every wound was cataloged and treated, every muscle strain evaluated for its impact on future performance. His body had become valuable property now, worthy of significant investment and careful maintenance. That night, lying on his straw pallet in the cramped cell, Marcus found sleep elusive despite his physical exhaustion. Vero's death played over and over in his mind, each detail crystal clear and unnaturally vivid. The moment when his blade found its mark, the expression on the veteran's face, the weight of a dying man's body falling against him, all of it felt simultaneously real and dreamlike, as if his mind was protecting itself by treating the experience as fiction. The other gladiators in his cell gave him space to process his first kill, understanding the psychological weight that came with taking a life in the arena. Some men never recovered from that initial trauma, while others found it easier with each subsequent death. Marcus wondered which category he would fall into, and whether the question itself was already a sign that something fundamental had changed within him. Winter settled over the ludus with its promise of reduced arena activity and intensified training schedules. The cooler months gave gladiators time to heal from injuries and perfect techniques that might save their lives when the spring games resumed. Marcus had been at the school for 6 months now, his body bearing the accumulated scars of countless training sessions in his one arena victory. The January cold of 74 AD bit deep into the stone walls, making sleep difficult and training painful. The gladiator market operated on economic principles that most Romans never considered, but which determined every aspect of a fighter's existence. Prime gladiators, those with multiple arena victories and proven drawing power, could be valued at over 100,000 sestertii, enough to purchase a comfortable villa or maintain a middle-class family for decades. Marcus's single victory had increased his worth substantially, though he remained far from the elite tier of fighters who commanded premium prices. Lanista Gaius conducted monthly evaluations of his human assets with the cold precision of a livestock trader. Each gladiator's performance, injuries, and psychological state were carefully documented in wax tablets that served as investment portfolios. Marcus had earned favorable marks for his victory over Vero, but the Lanista noted concerns about his apparent reluctance to fully embrace the gladiatorial lifestyle. Successful fighters needed to cultivate a taste for violence, not merely endure it. The social hierarchy within the ludus reflected the economic realities of the gladiatorial trade. Veterans with multiple victories enjoyed better food, more comfortable sleeping arrangements, and greater freedom of movement within the school's walls. They formed an informal aristocracy among the condemned, their survival skills earning them respect from newer arrivals who hoped to learn the secrets of staying alive in the arena. Training during the winter months focused on technique refinement and conditioning rather than the brutal combat practice of warmer seasons. Marcus worked with wooden weapons against practice posts, perfecting the precise movements that could mean the difference between life and death. His muscles had adapted to the constant physical demands, developing the specific strength and endurance required for arena combat. The transformation from soldier to gladiator was nearly complete, though mentally he still resisted full acceptance of his fate. The ludus received regular visits from potential buyers and betting syndicates, who evaluated gladiators like merchants examining merchandise. These inspections were humiliating affairs where fighters were required to demonstrate their skills, while wealthy Romans discussed their merits and flaws as if they were livestock. Marcus had learned to endure these examinations with stoic indifference, understanding that showing emotion would only lower his perceived value. Food rations during winter were carefully calculated to maintain fighting weight while managing costs. The gladiators received barley porridge, occasional meat, and watered wine, enough nutrition to sustain intensive training, but nothing that could be considered luxury. Medical care followed similar economic logic. With significant resources devoted to maintaining valuable fighters, while injured, newcomers received minimal attention. Marcus's victory had earned him better treatment, including regular massage to prevent muscle injuries. The psychological conditioning continued throughout the winter months, designed to break down civilian inhibitions against killing and replace them with professional detachment. Dr. Lucius regularly lectured on the honor of dying well in the arena, emphasizing that a gladiator's death could achieve a form of immortality through the memories of those who witnessed it. The message was clear. Since death was inevitable, the only meaningful choice was how to face it. Marcus found himself increasingly isolated from his fellow gladiators as his reputation grew. The brotherhood of the condemned was complicated by the reality that any of them might be ordered to kill any other on a moment's notice. Friendship became a luxury that few could afford, replaced by professional respect and guarded cooperation. Trust was dangerous in a world where survival often depended on another man's death. The business correspondence that Lanista Gaius conducted with arena managers throughout the empire revealed the vast scope of the gladiatorial industry. Cities from Britain to Egypt regularly requested specific types of fighters for their local games, and the logistics of moving human cargo across thousands of miles required sophisticated planning. Marcus learned that his own fate might involve travel to distant provinces where local crowds demanded exotic entertainment from foreign fighters. As winter progressed toward spring, the anticipation of renewed arena activity grew palpable throughout the ludus. Veterans sharpened their weapons and intensified their training, while newer gladiators like Marcus tried to prepare mentally for what might be their final months of life. The economics of the gladiatorial trade demanded a steady supply of deaths to satisfy public appetite, and everyone understood that most of them would not survive to see another winter. The summons arrived on a rain-soaked morning in March of 74 AD, delivered by an imperial messenger whose purple-trimmed toga marked him as a direct representative of Emperor Vespasian's court. The scroll he carried bore the official seal of the Flavian Amphitheater, the great Colosseum that had become synonymous with gladiatorial spectacle throughout the empire. 25 gladiators from the Capua Ludus had been selected for the upcoming games celebrating the emperor's birthday, and Marcus's name appeared prominently on the list. The honor of fighting in Rome's premier arena came with both prestige and heightened danger. Colosseum crowds were notoriously sophisticated, demanding higher levels of skill and spectacle than provincial audiences. Gladiators who disappointed the Roman mob faced swift and brutal punishment, while those who excelled could achieve fame that transcended their slave status. For most fighters, the Colosseum represented either the pinnacle of their careers or their tomb, rarely both. Preparation for the journey to Rome began immediately, with selected gladiators receiving enhanced medical care and improved rations to ensure they arrived in peak condition. Marcus underwent a thorough examination by the ludus's best physician, who pronounced him fit for travel despite lingering soreness from a training injury. His equipment was inspected and upgraded where necessary, with particular attention paid to his armor's fit and his weapon's balance. The economic implications of a Colosseum appearance were staggering. The cost of transporting gladiators to Rome, housing them, and maintaining them during their stay could exceed the purchase price of an entire ludus. However, the potential rewards were equally impressive. Successful gladiators could command appearance fees that enriched their owners for years. The Emperor's Games also provided unparalleled networking opportunities for ambitious Lanistae seeking to expand their operations. The 25 selected fighters represented the cream of the Capua School's roster. Among them was Ferox, a Germanic warrior whose blonde braids and blue war paint made him a crowd favorite. There was also Serpentius, a Syrian whose lightning-fast reflexes with paired daggers had never failed to thrill audiences. Marcus found himself in exalted company, though he wondered whether his inclusion was based on skill or simply the need for fresh meat to feed the arena's insatiable appetite. Travel arrangements reflected the valuable nature of the human cargo being transported. The gladiators rode in reinforced wagons with comfortable seating and adequate food, their chains lighter than usual to prevent injury during the 3-day journey. Armed guards accompanied the convoy at all times, but their primary purpose was protection rather than prevention of escape. Gladiators worth taking to the Colosseum were far too valuable to risk losing to highway bandits. The first sight of Rome's walls rising from the Campanian plains filled Marcus with a mixture of awe and dread. The city's sheer scale dwarfed anything he had previously experienced, its population approaching 1 million souls from every corner of the known world. Smoke from countless cooking fires darkened the sky, while the constant noise of commerce, construction, and human activity created a din that could be heard for miles. This was the beating heart of the empire that had conquered his homeland and enslaved his people. The gladiator barracks beneath the Colosseum were a marvel of engineering efficiency, designed to house hundreds of fighters in conditions that balanced security with the need to maintain their health and fighting ability. Stone corridors connected individual cells, training areas, and medical facilities in an underground complex that few Romans ever saw. The accommodations were superior to most provincial ludi, reflecting the emperor's investment in providing quality entertainment for his citizens. Marcus's cell was small but clean, with a proper bed, adequate lighting, and even a small window that provided glimpses of the arena floor above. His cellmate was Titus, a veteran retiarius whose net and trident style had earned him 12 victories in various amphitheaters throughout the empire. The man's scarred arms told the story of countless battles, while his calm demeanor suggested someone who had made peace with his probable fate. The orientation process for new arrivals was conducted with military precision. Each gladiator received detailed briefings on Colosseum protocols, crowd expectations, and the specific requirements of the upcoming games. The arena's sand was different from what they were accustomed to, specially imported and treated to absorb blood more effectively while providing optimal footing for combat. Even the smallest details were carefully managed to ensure maximum spectacle. That first night, in the shadow of the great amphitheater, Marcus lay awake, listening to the sounds of the eternal city settling into sleep. Somewhere above him, 50,000 seats waited to be filled with Romans hungry for blood and spectacle. In a few days, he would stand on that sand and fight for his life, while the most powerful people in the world watched for their entertainment. The transformation from Germanic warrior to Roman gladiator would reach its completion in the arena, where emperors had decided the fate of countless men before him. Emperor Vespasian's 65th birthday celebration promised to be the most spectacular gladiatorial event of 74 AD, with games lasting 3 full days and featuring over 200 fighters from across the empire. The aging emperor, now in his 5th year of rule, understood better than most the political value of magnificent spectacles and maintaining public support. Bread and circuses were not mere entertainment, but essential tools of imperial governance, keeping the Roman masses content while the business of empire continued. The morning of the first day dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for the thousands of spectators who would fill every seat in the great amphitheater. Marcus had been selected for the afternoon program, which traditionally featured the most skilled gladiators in contests designed to showcase technical expertise rather than mere brutality. His opponent would be Maximus, a veteran secutor from a prestigious Alexandrian ludus whose defensive style had earned him 15 arena victories across 3 provinces. Preparation rituals began before dawn with a ceremonial breakfast that many gladiators treated as their final meal. The food was exceptional by gladiator standards: fresh bread, honey, dates, and even wine of decent quality. Marcus ate sparingly, his stomach too tight with nerves to appreciate delicacies that would have seemed luxurious during his months of training. Around him, other fighters made their own peace with mortality in ways both quiet and dramatic. The underground complex beneath the arena floor buzzed with activity as attendants, physicians, and trainers made final preparations for the day's events. Weapons were sharpened to perfect edges, armor was polished to mirror brightness, and the gladiators themselves were oiled and groomed until their bodies gleamed like bronze statues. Every detail was calculated to create maximum visual impact when they emerged into the brilliant sunlight above. The crowd's energy was palpable even from the holding areas deep beneath the arena. 50,000 voices created a constant murmur that rose and fell with the action above, punctuated by roars of approval or groans of disappointment. Marcus could hear the emperor's presence announced by trumpet fanfares and formal proclamations, followed by the thunderous applause of citizens honoring their supreme leader. The political theater was as carefully choreographed as the combat that would follow. When Marcus's turn came, he ascended through the complex system of lifts and passages that allowed gladiators to appear dramatically on the arena floor. The sudden transition from underground darkness to blazing daylight was disorienting, but training had prepared him for this moment. The crowd's roar hit him like a physical force as he emerged, their bloodthirsty enthusiasm both terrifying and oddly intoxicating. This was the moment every gladiator trained for, alone on the sand with eternity watching. Emperor Vespasian himself was clearly visible in the imperial box, a surprisingly modest figure given his supreme authority over the known world. At 65, his lined face showed the strain of governing an empire that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia, but his eyes remained sharp as he evaluated the gladiators arrayed before him. A slight nod from the emperor could mean life or death for any fighter, making his approval the ultimate prize in gladiatorial competition. The preliminary ceremonies proceeded with practice deficiency. Gladiators saluted the emperor with a traditional formula, received blessings from priests of Mars, and submitted to final weapons inspections. The betting pools had reached astronomical levels, with some wealthy Romans wagering fortunes on the afternoon's outcomes. Marcus noticed several senators pointing in his direction, apparently discussing his chances against the experienced Maximus. The moment of truth arrived with a trumpet blast that silenced the massive crowd. Marcus and Maximus took their positions at opposite ends of the arena, each man representing years of training, countless hours of preparation, and the dreams and fears of everyone who had invested in their success or failure. The emperor raised his hand, paused for dramatic effect, then let it fall in the signal that would begin what might be the last minutes of both fighters' lives. The first exchanges were cautious, each gladiator testing his opponent's reflexes and timing while the crowd settled into appreciative silence. Maximus fought with the patient confidence of a true professional, his shield work flawless and his counterattacks precisely timed. Marcus responded with aggressive combinations designed to overwhelm defensive tactics. But the veteran's experience showed in his ability to neutralize even the most violent assaults. As the contest progressed, Marcus began to understand why Maximus had survived 15 previous battles. The man was not spectacular in any single aspect of combat, but his overall skill level was extraordinarily high and consistent. Every movement was economical and purposeful, wasting no energy on flashy techniques that pleased crowds but left fighters vulnerable. Marcus realized he was facing a master craftsman of arena combat, someone who had elevated gladiatorial fighting to an art form. The turning point came in the 8th minute of combat, when a perfectly timed combination left Maximus slightly off balance for just an instant. Marcus seized the opportunity with desperate fury, his gladius finding the gap between his opponent's armor plates. The crowd erupted as both men fell to the sand, locked in an embrace that would determine which of them would see another sunset in the Eternal City. The roar of 50,000 voices crashed over Marcus like a tidal wave as Maximus's life ebbed away beneath him on the blood-stained sand. The veteran gladiator's eyes, wide with surprise at his first defeat, stared sightlessly at the afternoon sky, while his blood pooled around Marcus's knees. The transformation from living warrior to cooling corpse had taken only seconds, but the psychological impact would last forever. Marcus had now killed 2 men in single combat, each death adding weight to his soul that no amount of crowd adulation could lift. Emperor Vespasian rose from his throne in the imperial box, his weathered face showing approval at the quality of combat he had just witnessed. The emperor's nod of satisfaction was worth more than gold to the Lanista who owned Marcus, representing not just imperial favor, but the promise of future commissions and increased value for his stable of fighters. Political power and gladiatorial success were intimately connected in Roman society, where spectacular victories could elevate their architects to positions of influence and wealth. The immediate aftermath of combat was always surreal for surviving gladiators. Marcus knelt in the sand, surrounded by the deafening approval of thousands, yet feeling utterly alone with the weight of another man's death on his conscience. Maximus had been a skilled professional who had survived 15 previous battles through superior technique and battlefield wisdom, but luck and youth had finally outweighed experience. The randomness of arena survival was one of its most terrifying aspects. Medical attention arrived swiftly in the form of Greek physicians, whose expertise had been honed by treating countless arena injuries. Marcus's wounds were superficial compared to many gladiatorial contests, a few cuts that would heal cleanly and some deep bruising that would fade within weeks. The real damage was psychological. Though the arena's medical staff were equipped only to treat physical trauma, mental wounds were left to heal themselves or fester into madness. The victory celebration that evening was a lavish affair held in the underground chambers beneath the amphitheater. Successful gladiators were treated to fine food, quality wine, and even the company of expensive courtesans, rewards designed to make their temporary survival seem worthwhile despite its precarious nature. Marcus participated mechanically, going through the motions of celebration while his mind remained fixed on Maximus's final moments. The dead man's surprised expression haunted him more than the earlier death of Varro, perhaps because this victory had come before the emperor himself. Financial calculations were already being made regarding Marcus's increased value following his Colosseum triumph. Gladiators with imperial victories commanded premium prices, and successful fighters could generate enormous revenues through appearance fees, betting pools, and merchandise sales. Marcus had become a valuable asset whose worth would continue growing with each subsequent victory, assuming he survived long enough to accumulate additional wins. The social dynamics among gladiators shifted noticeably after Marcus's second arena victory. Veterans, who had previously treated him as a promising newcomer, now regarded him with the wary respect accorded to proven killers. The brotherhood of the condemned was complicated by the reality that any man's success came at the cost of another's death, creating relationships that mixed camaraderie with underlying tension. trust was a luxury that few could afford in a world where survival often required killing friends. Sleep proved elusive that night, despite the physical exhaustion of combat and celebration. Marcus lay on his comfortable bed, a privilege earned through victory, replaying every moment of his fight with Maximus. The veteran's defensive techniques had been nearly flawless, but a single instant of imperfect timing had created the opening that led to his death. The margin between triumph and tragedy in gladiatorial combat was often measured in fractions of seconds, a reality that made each victory feel more like borrowed time than earned reward. The morning brought news that would reshape Marcus's immediate future. Emperor Vespasian had been sufficiently impressed by the previous day's performance to commission a special exhibition match for the games' final day. Marcus would face Brutus the Thracian, a legendary fighter whose 23 arena victories had made him famous throughout the empire. The contest would serve as the climactic event of the birthday celebration, with the emperor himself presenting a golden wreath to the victor. Training for this ultimate challenge began immediately, with the finest instructors in Rome analyzing Brutus's fighting style and developing strategies to exploit his few known weaknesses. The Thracian was renowned for his aggressive attacking style and his ability to overwhelm opponents through sheer ferocity. But at 31 years old, he might be beginning to lose the speed that had made him legendary. Marcus's youth and recent victories suggested he might be able to match the veteran's intensity while outlasting his endurance. The weight of expectation was enormous. This would be the most important gladiatorial contest of the year, watched by the emperor, the entire imperial court, and 50,000 spectators. Victory would secure Marcus's place among the elite fighters of the empire, while defeat would mean death on the grandest possible stage. Either way, his name would be remembered long after his body returned to dust, achieving the immortality that all gladiators dreamed of but few ever reached. The third day of Emperor Vespasian's birthday games dawned with an oppressive heat that seemed to press down upon the great amphitheater like a suffocating blanket. Marcus had spent the night in fitful sleep, his dreams haunted by the faces of Varro and Maximus, the two men whose deaths had elevated him to this moment of ultimate trial. Today he would face Brutus the Thracian, a legend whose name was whispered with equal measures of fear and respect throughout the gladiatorial world. 23 victories had made Brutus more than a fighter. He had become a symbol of what human will could achieve when death was the only alternative to triumph. The preparation rituals took on heightened significance before this climactic contest. Marcus submitted to the ministrations of the arena's finest attendants, who oiled his body until it gleamed like polished bronze and checked every piece of his equipment with meticulous care. His gladius had been sharpened to a razor edge, his shield repaired and reinforced, and his armor adjusted to provide maximum protection without sacrificing mobility. Every detail mattered when facing an opponent of Brutus's caliber. The crowd's anticipation was electric as the morning's preliminary events concluded, and attention turned to the afternoon's featured attraction. Betting had reached unprecedented levels, with some wealthy Romans wagering entire estates on the contest's outcome. The emperor himself had reportedly placed a substantial sum on Marcus, influenced perhaps by the young gladiator's impressive performance against Maximus. Such imperial favor was both an honor and a burden, adding political pressure to an already overwhelming situation. Brutus the Thracian was a magnificent specimen of human conditioning and will. At 31, his scarred body still moved with the fluid grace of a natural competitor. But careful observers might have noticed a slight stiffness in his left knee, a remnant from a spear thrust received during his 15th victory. His dark eyes held the calm confidence of a man who had faced death so often that it no longer frightened him. 23 men had tried to kill him in single combat, and 23 men had failed. Today would determine whether Marcus would become the 24th name on that list of defeats. The final ceremony before combat was conducted with unusual solemnity, befitting the significance of the occasion. Emperor Vespasian himself descended from the imperial box to personally inspect both gladiators, a rare honor that spoke to his investment in the afternoon's entertainment. The emperor's weathered hands touched each man's shoulder as he spoke words of encouragement that were lost in the crowd's roar. But his presence alone elevated this contest beyond mere spectacle into something approaching religious ritual. As the two gladiators took their positions at opposite ends of the arena, Marcus felt a strange sense of completion settling over him. The journey from captured Germanic warrior to elite Roman gladiator had led inexorably to this moment, and whether he lived or died in the next few minutes seemed almost secondary to the achievement of having reached this pinnacle of his brutal profession. The crowd of 50,000 represented the entire civilized world, watching as two men prepared to settle their differences in the most permanent way possible. The signal to begin came with a thunderclap of drums that seemed to shake the very foundations of the great amphitheater. Brutus moved with the practiced efficiency of a master craftsman, his attack patterns flowing seamlessly from one technique to another in combinations that had proven lethal against countless opponents. Marcus responded with the desperate fury of youth, knowing that his only chance lay in matching the veteran's intensity while outlasting his endurance through superior conditioning. The first phase of combat was a masterclass in gladiatorial technique, with both men demonstrating skills that had been honed through years of training and actual battle experience. Brutus's legendary aggression was balanced by surprising defensive awareness, while Marcus's relative inexperience was offset by his willingness to take risks that more cautious fighters would have avoided. The crowd appreciated every nuance of the contest, understanding that they were witnessing something truly special. 10 minutes into the battle, both gladiators were bleeding from multiple wounds, their bodies painted with red streams that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. Neither man had gained a decisive advantage, and the crowd's tension was becoming palpable as they realized this might be one of those legendary contests that ended with both fighters dead on the sand. Such outcomes were rare but not unknown, representing the ultimate expression of gladiatorial courage and skill. The turning point came suddenly and without warning. Brutus, perhaps affected by accumulated fatigue or the old injury to his knee, stumbled slightly during a complex attack combination. Marcus seized the opportunity with the reflexes of someone fighting for his life, his gladius finding the gap in the veteran's defenses with surgical precision. The crowd erupted as both men fell to the sand, Brutus's legendary career ending in the same place where so many of his opponents had breathed their last. Emperor Vespasian himself presented the golden victory wreath to Marcus, placing it on the young gladiator's head while 50,000 voices chanted his name. The transformation was complete, from slave to champion, from condemned prisoner to imperial favorite. Yet, as Marcus knelt in the blood-stained sand holding the symbol of his triumph, he knew that this victory, like all gladiatorial success, was temporary. Tomorrow there would be another arena, another opponent, another chance to die for the entertainment of people who would forget his name before his body grew cold. The cycle was eternal, and he was now trapped at its center forever. Thank you for joining me on this cozy corner of history. If you enjoyed our time together tonight, I'd love it if you subscribe and share these stories with a friend. There are so many more fascinating tales to explore together. But for now, I'll bid you a fond good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you next time for another journey into the past.